Everybody, welcome to this new chapter of Health 2.0 Barcelona chapter. So we're super excited to be back after a few months. Like it's the first time we're doing the event online, so super exciting. And tonight we're doing it together with Health 2.0 Buenos Aires and Meetup AI Berlin. So this is really great on a topic that the community asked for, ethics and AI. So for those of you who don't know Health 2.0 Barcelona, it's a group that we started back in 2012. Yeah, we're getting old. The group is big. The group is very active. And the idea was to bring together the different actors of the digital ecosystem on the local level. So we did it in Barcelona, Andrea did it in Buenos Aires, and like that in like 100 cities in the world. So we do events regularly where we bring together those different actors. So we give visibility to the actors, and we want connections to happen, synergies to happen, and collaboration between the different actors to advance innovation and healthcare, to improve patients' life and healthcare professionals' life. And so, as I said, my pleasure tonight to be hosting this event with Andrea, who is leading the Health 2.0 Buenos Aires chapter.
Thank you very much, Aline. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and especially in this topic that is too important for us to discuss. And I would like to present Nicolas, that is going to be our MC today. Welcome, Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much, Aline, for the invitation as well. My name is Nicolas Bersotto. I am tonight representing also Meetup AI Berlin, the third member of this coalition tonight for ethics in AI in healthcare. It's a super interesting topic. It's also a topic that is very dear to our community back in Berlin. And we have explored this from a couple of directions, and AI in healthcare specifically brings some of the most interesting examples of ethics in the field. And to kind of start off what we're going to be presenting tonight, we believe there would be an interesting way to first to showcase some of the main problems in ethics and AI, which are broadly broken down in interpretability. So understanding why AI does what it says it does. Also, in that sense, what can AI do and what can't AI do? The matter of privacy and the trade-off between privacy and efficiency. And finally, the problem of bias. And as privacy is the one line that kind of covers most of those topics and connects most of the trade-offs inside of AI and ethics, we all believe that would be a great way to start with a small talk by Sebastià Agramunt on privacy-preserving machine learning. Sebastià will be joining me on stage right now. Sebastià, thank you very much for coming. I will yield to you the stage for a couple of minutes, and we see each other on the panel in a bit. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Nicolas, for the kind introduction. Okay, let me present myself. I'm Sebastià Agramunt. I work as a software engineer, and more precisely in the privacy-preserving AI field. So I've been in this field for 2 years now. I'm going to show a little bit of my ins and outs of this field and where I think it's going, no? And especially in the case of health. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see now? Anybody in the chat? Whoops. Okay, I guess you can see. Okay. So first, what is privacy-preserving machine learning? The plain and simple definition is the following one. PPML is a set of techniques that allows learning information of a population without ever seeing the data. And this looks pretty weird, and that's why I want to present you 2 use cases. The first one is, for instance, you have several hospitals, right here, which are taking MRI images. And some of these images, mostly all of the images, are tagged, probably they have some tumorous images in there, or the final outcome would be to classify if an image has something dangerous, right? So it has to be reviewed better by the physician. No? So what can we do with this data? Obviously, the hospitals cannot share the data of their patients among each other, no? And if they rely on a third party, they could do the following. They could send each one their data to this party, right? Each of them. So this party holds all the data and trains a machine learning model. This is not good, again, because this third party will have access to all the data from all the patients. So we would require for a privacy setting that hospitals don't share the data, and the trained model that we eventually have here is the same as if we were training with all the data available by ourselves. So a partial solution could be federated learning. This is a new set of techniques. In the previous slide, I've shown you that the hospitals send the data to a third party. In this case, it's this third party that holds the IP, the intellectual property of the machine learning algorithm. It shares these machine learning algorithms to the hospital, and the hospital performs the training in the premises. So they make the model smarter, right? And then each hospital send their updates into this model, and then you can aggregate the contribution of each hospital. This is more secure, but it's not completely secure, because if you have one model initially and then you are sent another model that is better because it has been trained on some other data, you can still get some information from the patients that this model has been trained on. Another application in which privacy is a concern is, for instance, the melanoma detector. There are several apps in the market already that, well, you can take a picture and it tells you if you shall go to the doctor or not. I think it was a paper from 2016 from Stanford University that they proved that they could train a classifier to tell you, the same accuracy as a physician, more or less, to classify if some skin, some mold is benign or malign, right? So this is the use case. You take a picture with your phone because you want to know if you should visit your dermatologist. This image gets uploaded to the cloud, the service provider, in which they run the inference. They have this machine learning model trained on many data from many patients, and you are just asking, hey, classify me this picture. Shall I go to the doctor? Yes or no? And then you get back a reply. Looks good, you're fine, don't need to go to the doctor, or doesn't really good, please visit a dermatologist. Obviously, this is a privacy concern, no? I'm sending my image to a cloud provider, and not only they have my image, they are able to classify if I should go to the doctor or not, which is, for me, is a privacy concern. So I wouldn't personally use these kind of tools as of now. So there are several techniques that can tackle privacy in the field of machine learning, no? I'm going to mention very, very briefly 3 of them, and I hope we can discuss a little bit afterwards in the panel. So the first one is homomorphic encryption. In homomorphic encryption, let's take the same example as we were talking before, no? The image classification. So in here you have the user that has taken this picture with the phone. He encrypts the image, looking something like noise to the cloud computing. Sends this image there in the cloud. They compute this inference on the machine learning model with the data still encrypted. So this cloud provider here is not able to decrypt the image, see the image, and then perform the prediction, right? It's calculating with the data already still encrypted. So it does the inference with the model, right, and sends back the encrypted response. And then the only party that has the keys is the owner of the image. So he just has to take the keys and decrypt and see if has to visit the doctor or not. As simple as that, but it gets really complicated when you go to production. The next technique is differential privacy. And this is mainly a technique in which you can add noise to the data. So thinking of images, if you have taken this image, you can blur the image a little bit with some filter. And this still contains information, right? You can see here the mold, and you can see lighter skin color in this zone. So it contains information, but it doesn't contain as much information as the original image. With this, you can still train a machine learning model, but you would need a lot of data to really have the same prediction power. And the third technique is secure multi-party computation, or SMPC, in which, again, this is very schematic. This is just an example. But here, the data owner, the owner of the image, splits the data into 3, 4, or n parties, which If you take just one of them or several of them, n minus one of them actually, you would see random noise. But if you combine them all, you would be able to reconstruct the original image. So you send each part of the image, this is called a share of the image, to the computing party. That for him is just a simple random noise. He's not able to tell what is this information. So here you do some computations, and then you get back a prediction when you combine the responses of all these computing parties. So as long as two of them are, just one of them is trustworthy, this would be secure. So if all the three are malicious, then here we would have a problem. But that's normally not the case, right? So this is all I wanted to say for this talk. Thank you for listening. Listening has been very, very brief, but I hope this generates some discussion for the following panel. Thank you very much.
But of course, thank you very much, Sebastià, and thank you very much for already showing some of the ways that we're trying to deal with privacy in the AI setting. I will invite now all of our speakers up to stage. I also want to let everybody watching us know that we're going to be doing rolling Q&A for this panel, which means that I'll be paying attention to your comments and questions on the comments, and also the team, Andrea especially, will be highlighting some of the best questions for me on screen so the panel can kind of engage with it. So we're joined tonight with 4 great speakers, a few that I had the pleasure of already working before in similar topics, and a few brand new faces. So I'm very, very excited about what we're going to bring, a truly international crowd. So we already heard a bit about Sebastià, but I would like the other members of the panel to do a bit of an introduction about themselves, and maybe if they already want to add something on how ethics plays a role in their work, it would be a very interesting start. So from my right, let's start off with Vince Madai.
Thank you, Nico. So as you just said, my name is Vince Madai. I'm a medical doctor, neuroscientist, I'm an ethicist, and since over a few years, I have specialized on machine learning, what everybody calls AI today. So mainly, I work, and this is also the connection to the ethics. I work on the translation of AI in healthcare tools from the proof of concepts to the clinical setting. We do, in our lab in Berlin, we do applied AI on data, but we also work on, for example, the ethical questions, also the ones that impede translation. And one of them, of course, would be bias that you just mentioned. That, of course, is a really big problem, as many of the tools that hit the headlines better than a doctor, actually proof of concept studies, usually in very homogeneous, sometimes very small data sets, and then the performance plummets when it's applied somewhere else.
Great. Raj, what about you?
Hey, this is Raj Pallapothu. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I'm a physician, technologist, entrepreneur, investor, and professor as well, and founding director for AI School and board advisor for multiple digital health activities and precision medicine consortia globally. That's a great points that Sebastià is talking about here. So when we're coming to the bias and privacy, the primary things are from the clinician, from the realistic on the ground reality, both from the patients, from the hospital settings. It's all about how well the transparency comes in play, right? And also the fairness, especially incorporating the social determinants, population health, and all those things to avoid the bias. And then building these compliances models is also very, very important. And above all, we will see then the last one will come is how well the intelligence can assist and driving the experiences to the patient care. Yeah.
Very good point, Raj. Elena?
Well, hello. Nice to be in your company, both Nico, Vince, and of course Aline. So it's a small reunion for me. So we've been together in different panels over the years. So I'm Elena Pugui. I'm originally from Greece, but I've been spending the last 5 years, almost 6, in Berlin, where I had the pleasure to also meet and work with Nico and Aline. And I run this media company called Economy. So we focused on anything around data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and we cover it from different angles, from purely news to actually research and innovation as much as possible. And of course, healthcare is a big part of it. There's a lot of data there, and the questions of ethics, interoperability, and privacy really come together there because we're talking about human lives. I think more and more data scientists and people working with data face let's say the dilemma of being data ethicists, because at the end of the day, they really have to make decisions that could impact other people's lives. And the same way, I think, because we're here and discussing physicians and healthcare, the same way that a physician is to take an oath, I think similarly we discuss like how we can use this data and how open this data should be and how it can be shared from an ethical standpoint. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to having this discussion from this perspective as well. Really focusing on this angle, and yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Very, very nice. Sebastià, you were a bit short on time before, so I give you also the opportunity now to say a bit more about yourself, or if you want to jump directly into ethics, that is also completely fine by me. So your turn.
Okay. Yeah, so I started as my background is PhD in physics, and I spent some time in the field of data science and machine learning, software development as well. So I'm kind of a mixture, but I've always been close to science. So the last thing I did was working. I was working at Alpha, developing this algorithm for federated learning with secure aggregation. That is a paper that Google published in 2017, I think. And yeah, I enjoy both coding and making applications for something useful. And if it's healthcare, that's going to be awesome, right? Because it turns into all of us, and it's very important.
That's a very powerful sentence that I have found myself saying a few times before as well, Sebastià. That's one of the pleasures of working in healthcare. And Sebastià kind of started off the night by telling a bit about a solution to a problem that a lot of us might think about, but don't think about too much, especially in terms of the AI development and also product development. So what is at stake when we say about the issue of privacy? What is at risk? And I would throw this question first to Vince. So what is the fear that we have when we are trying to develop something and we're worried about privacy? You also work a lot in the translational space. So maybe how privacy plays a role in research, but also then in a real product, in the real market.
Sure. I mean, let's take imaging. If we take an image of your brain, let's say an MRI or CT, I would argue it's probably like a fingerprint. So your brain configuration is so unique that this is really something that can be traced to you as easily as basically a fingerprint. And like any other data that is so directly linked to us, we of course have not only a right, but we also want this data to be to certain degrees as private as possible, unless we allowed it to be used somewhere. Now, of course, the degree of privacy is then what is debatable. If we, for example, look at a country like Germany, where data privacy is very, very, very strong, often in the discussions about data privacy, it's kind of people look at it as if there was no alternative to it, at least to the degree of the privacy that is possible. Just from an ethical point of view, of course, it's not exactly like this, because there is the problem. Just a side thought. Sorry, we have a lot of data in healthcare, right? Really a lot. We could train incredible algorithms, but because of this data privacy, we cannot access them. So there is also the good that we could do with better healthcare tools. And so now suddenly you have two goods, which is data privacy and the good that you could do for people who are sick. And I sometimes feel that this discussion in some countries is not honest in that sense, because we don't tell the people what could be done. It's always like, your data will be stolen by X. I mean, who wouldn't say, of course I don't want my data to be stolen? But this is not really the real discussion. We're talking about the degrees of it. So our privacy is at stake, but we also need to understand what could it be used for. So just as a food for thought.
No, and I'm gonna take that hook and I'm gonna give it to Raj, because Raj has worked a lot in the setting of clinical and pharma. Raj, what are the implications of privacy in development? So do you see privacy often as a not a problem, but as an issue or challenge in trying to create a product or to finance a company or to think that a project has value?
That's actually a great question. It actually differs. We call differential privacy. All these data perturbation, based privacy approaches that are currently cropping up across the board. Basically, the single individuals tied to a single individual or a system. So that opening the flaws of many of the capabilities of statistical reasoning about the data sets, the collection of the data set, right? So it's the ingestion of the data sets to collection of the data set to the analysis of the data set, all involves some sort of, that it's not about a fear, it's about the moral ethics behind it, the real world evidence we call it as, and tied to the differential privacy settings. And what sort of that actually offers some sort of resistance to re-identification attacks sort of things, how you linkage and differentiate the data between different sets. And but privacy budgets are aligned on the clinical, from clinical grounds, from the hospitals, from the powers and everything. But where they have to focus, where they have to contract is always a challenge. And I think earlier Sebastian is talking about introduction of noise to the data sets, images and everything, right? That's always, that's something we want to explore. We want to look around what is the best way we can mitigate those flaws and also the fear among the patients, how their data are going to be pursued. At the end of the day, we want to put the data owner in control, and align to the healthcare applications that's coming out. So, probably we all know that we are going in a federated learning approach, right? But again, healthcare is not ready to go off that open ecosystem. So there's a lot of, challenges that actually on the ground that we have to brace for.
I think that was an interesting point that Raj mentioned there with the resistance that comes from a lot of teams. And this is a topic that I know Vince has already written about before, how technology teams sometimes deal with ethical issues such as privacy. But I'm going to send this one to Elena to give us a bit of a sneak peek on the mind of data scientists and the people developing those algorithms. How do you think that they feel about issues of privacy and ethics? Is this something that is important to them? You've said very, very well that a lot of them feel also that they have a role to play in this whole debate. So what do you think?
Yeah, so actually, as the conversation evolved, for me, I was thinking more of the citizen rather than the data scientist, because I think when it comes to this debate of data privacy versus openness, there's always this I would say fake or fake or more hidden dichotomy that essentially if something is private, then necessarily means that it's not open. But I think what is lacking here in terms of the citizen and how they would be more willing and accepting to share their data sets would be transparency. And I think one thing when it comes to data privacy in this whole debate between private and public and institutions, startups versus corporates is more the question of data monopolies, right? The data inequalities of who has most access to this data, and that is the fear I think that when also it comes from a B2B perspective. But going back to the citizen and again also connecting with the data scientist, there's the recurring theme of conscious or subconscious, let's say, bias here, which is the data sets that you collect, what kind of result they will bring based on what kind of data sets you have. And that's also always the fear when it comes to the ethics of AI or the ethics of machine learning, the ethics in healthcare. But yeah, raising more awareness and actually kind of the bridging the gap between the data scientist and the citizen that actually would potentially contribute with their data to the healthcare study it's important so that we can actually open this up and maintain in a way our privacy, knowing pretty much what we're sharing and be willing to share it for the good and the betterment of research. I think like the more open we are, the better, and that way also there is a creation of competitive advantage to the market, but also individually to our lives. So I really think citizen data and the openness there would solve this problem.
I think it's a very interesting example of how different willingness to share data impacts product development was at the first wave of COVID, where everybody and their mother was creating COVID tracker apps. And I don't want the discussion to go into COVID at least, but it was just an interesting point of seeing different societies having to tackle kind of the same problem at the same time, where data privacy and data usage by the population was so important, right? So you had teams I'm going to send it back to you, Elena. We had teams working hard to try to get certain kinds of approval in Germany. And then you had Singapore basically saying like, you know what, screw this, we're just going to get it anyway because it's to save lives. And you have even some very nice use cases like Medellin in Colombia, which I really recommend, which is also a more local approach to this and trying to talk to people and send health workers. So it really connects with what Elena is saying. And I'm going to send it back to her because I feel that she has some thoughts as well.
But that's exactly when what it means with awareness and lack of awareness, because essentially we're reluctant to download an app that could potentially help us because we're afraid of what data we're sharing, and that's like really misinformation there. But then we're open with like sharing our data with everybody and essentially without knowing with any other providers on Google and the likes, essentially. So there's a gap of potentially created by media as well. That so I'm to blame. My industry is to blame as well for the reason why people are just misinformed and they don't know how and where to share the data to actually contribute.
Sebastià, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Sorry, Raj.
No, sorry. Go on, please, Raj.
I'm glad you mentioned, Nicholas, the COVID on the working for CDC. We have seen a lot of things with the automated diagnosis areas and prescription auditing where AI tools and heavily being used right now. And above all, right, the real-time prioritization in the trials where we are seeing a lot of, prescriptive analytics, that's what we call it as, And then personalized medicines has some sort of a journey to go on with, but this is where we are seeing profound solutions coming in place in this pandemonium. I don't want to just say COVID, and I think patient data analytics, that's been there for years, but it's also coming. People are feeling the value of it, at least in the hospital setting. That's what we are seeing.
I think just before I send it to Sebastian, I think that connects a lot with what Elena just said, because it kind of forced us to have that conversation. I think that the whole thing about the COVID tracker apps and things like this is that it forced the population to almost voice an opinion about a topic that we often don't ask citizens their true opinion about. As Vince said, we kind of say, do you like privacy? And they say, yes. And then they come back and say, like, see, they like privacy, so they don't want to do it, which is a false example. Sebastian, you had some thoughts?
Yes, that we are talking a lot about privacy, but we haven't mentioned what is privacy. Because when I speak to many people, the concept of privacy is very different from each of them, no? And actually, in the techniques that I presented you, it's a different concept on each of the techniques, what it means privacy, no? So I think there is still a lot of work to do. To let people know what is privacy and what does it mean privacy, for instance, in the healthcare domain. Does it mean that my MRI can be used for a statistical study if somebody controls it? I mean, I just signed a paper. I did it once. I signed a paper and my MRI goes to that study. That's okay, that's fine. But this is not privacy for me, no? It's a way probably to share my data in a way that is diluted in between the contribution of the other MRIs, let's say. So my contribution is negligible, or is that nobody can share my data? I wanted to raise this question to this whole panel because this has been difficult for me to define, actually.
All right, I actually quite like that question So
Yeah.
who wants to take it first?
I'm more than happy to do it.
And Raj?
Yes, that's a great question, actually. So we
Super
are
good.
doing something like, to mitigate the transparency, accountability issues coming from different user sets, either from the patients or physicians or pharma or whatever. We are coming up with the explainable models in AI, which is explainable AI. That's what the new things that we are addressing with. So there is a solid need for it, with the increasing ubiquity and of all these different models coming in. Accountability is growing strongly because the regulatory bodies are also trying to streamline a lot of, imposing some interventional regulatory things within this to open up what exactly built in within the algorithm. It's not just how it works, what exactly been built around that, right? So that's called explainable ML. And model fidelity, performance, all those will be tucked in the part of that. At the end of the day, it's addressing two things: the transparency and accountability. As long as we can open those two up, I think the users from the user side, they're well happy to take care of, not to worry about the privacy challenges.
So I will summarize a part of what Raj said here. So Raj, for you, a big part about privacy is an understanding on what it will be used for. So it's much more in transparency of what's the end result, or maybe the way to get there of using your data, rather than a concept of how much I'm willing to share, or this cannot be traced back to me, or something like this.
Exactly, because these days, right, Nicholas, people are seeing this, so many thousands of companies, people are seeing this AI ML as a service scenario, okay? So they would like to understand what that service is. Like you define an SLA. What is the SLA for these algorithms, right? Where is the data is getting sent, how it is getting processed? I need to know everything, right? So that's what it's going on.
That's a very, very good point. So who wants to take next, Vince or Elena?
I can do it. So,
of course.
I mean, I think it comes a little bit back to what was raised before, that there are different degrees to that, because different countries actually define this very, very differently. So generally, data privacy is the challenge, that we want to use data, and on the other hand, we want to protect the privacy, the individual's privacy when we use this data. This is kind of the overarching, most generic definition that you can use. And I think this, I just want to give an example. So I as I said, many people in these discussions assume the worst. Like, if people want, my data is going to end up with some big corporation and they can do whatever with it and make money with it. I think many patients would be surprised if they were told that unless they allow us, because the doctors treating them in the hospital, the data would never leave the hospital. We cannot readily use that actually to help other people. So the hospital they trust, and even if it never leaves that hospital, this is still not allowed. And I think many people would be very surprised about this, about that actually is not possible. And this is what I meant by this honest discussion. So this relationship between the protection of the individual and the usage of the data, it's not a hard border. There is much that we can discuss. I would like to later add, though, and I just wanna raise it, that I'm not that positive with regards that this is actually that easy to solve. So I know there's federated learning, I know there's all of this, but all the prerequisites to build that is actually very, very, very tough. So I'm a very big proponent of better anonymization, and we can talk about that later.
So that's a very good point. Let me just hit it to Elena, because I have another point to add on top before I send it to you, Sebastià.
Okay, so definition of privacy, building up on all what you all have been saying, I think from my, let's say, the broad definition that we use is related to transparency, essentially like how our data is being used, explainable AI in technical terms, federated learning. But I think like when it comes again back, taking it to the citizen, I think like I'm here representing the citizen. Two things, right? There's two things, simplifying it. And I think I'm simplifying it because I'm having a lot of discussions about it with people who are not necessarily inside this, and even like I mean, even more insight, like for you, for some of you, especially in healthcare, you're even more insight that I could claim to be, being more in the overall broad business and data science perspective. And it's more like, let's simplifying it with feelings of greed and anger, because there's the data monetization of, hey, they have my data and they're making money out of it, and I'm not making money out of my own data, which I think is like in the most basic reason why anyone would be angry for someone using their data without them benefiting. And the second thing is fear, right? It is the fear of discrimination. Oh, wait, I will be typecasted as the white female, age around 30 with this problem, which means that tomorrow the healthcare insurance will decline this and this and this because I'm more likely to have this and this and this. So I think this is like very basic why people are so hesitant with data privacy. And actually, when it comes to ethics, both of them are topics that we can explore, because ethically they're not very easily solvable. So
that's very, very good, Elena. And also from the citizen point of view, I think it's interesting that, and it's a point that I want to add specifically to Sebastià, who I also know has other points to add, that for a lot of people, if they have to connect privacy with one single word, would be anonymity. So to be anonymous. So I will send it to you, Sebastià, that whatever you want to add from before, and also a question on, is there such a thing as full anonymity in data today?
To my knowledge, no. To be honest, plain and clear.
I knew
no,
it.
But I wanted to raise some things. No, the data anonymization, for instance, that we've been talking about is not actually really private. I don't know if you heard about the governor's wealth from Massachusetts case. So apparently, this governor, I think it was a decade ago, he had a collapse during a public speech. So back in the day, you could buy the voters registry. The health records of everybody in Massachusetts, but anonymized, right? They would remove the names, directions, and just they would leave the zip code and the data. So this is data anonymization, right? But they were able to track the record of governor's wealth by just linking the two databases. No, they knew the one database is that they knew that he collapsed at that speech that day, and he was brought to that hospital, and also his zip code and his age. With that information, they were able to find governor's wealth health record. And this is anonymization, but still can imply a break on anonymity. No, like for instance, when Vince, you said that before, when you're taking an MRI of a brain, that's your identity as well. How can you, who prevents someone to take another image in another hospital and say, hey, these two images look pretty similar, right? So they must be from the same person. It's like your fingerprint. So anonymity, it's good for some cases, but it doesn't prevent. That's why people invented differential privacy. Actually, no. Differential privacy prevents all this in theory. Then you have your things, right? And I agree that to democratize these models, right? So that's a fair point I haven't thought about, to be honest, but it looks like the first thing to do. Okay, you're using my data, at least let me use this model or this information to have access to. That's a fair point.
And also, can I just quickly add something? Because so far we all agreed with each other, and it's a super boring panel. So I want to disagree now with someone.
Okay.
To disagree with what Sebastià said. You just said that that's anonymization, and I would argue it's not. And this is exactly the point, because if that was anonymization, we wouldn't have a problem in medicine. Because to clarify this, data privacy only kicks in if there's some identifiable information in the data. The moment it's anonymous, that data has zero protection, and that's fine because it cannot be traced to anyone. This is a very, very important thing. Now, why don't we share in medicine all the data and we can anonymize it? Simply because we can't. Because what you just outlined, taking a record, leaving the zip code in and having things like age and disease and whatever is not anonymous. It's not anonymous to any standard that you can look up. That's why we cannot share that data. So this is exactly the problem. we don't have tools actually that can properly anonymize medical data sets. And this is exactly why we're having these discussions about data privacy and the usage, because we know it's not there. Now, we've talked about all these methods, which are great, which can try to enable it with, I don't know, data donation in the end, asking people, federated learning, building up. It's super, super hard. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. But what we can also do is to try to actually make new methods of anonymization that reach a level where we're actually happy. And this is done at the moment with generative AI approaches, where we actually, this is something our group is also doing, trying to use generative AI, retain the statistical and predictive properties of the images, but these images are not real, they are generated. You probably know this site, this human is not real or whatever, something like this, or this person is not real. Something in that direction, just for medical imaging, and this could be a solution, because if we can do this and have really data that is anonymous, all these problems basically disappear. Yeah, sounds probably too good to be true, but it's still definitely a direction worth to go to. As a last comment, maybe, sorry, on this also, is that anonymization in the end is a legal construct. It's not a technological construct. Because nobody can rule out, let's say we use these great GANs now and anonymize, now you could come and say, listen, I assume that in 30 years with, I don't know, quantum computing, this can be de-anonymized. Yeah, sure, you can be right. If that is the basis, then we can never anonymize anything. Usually anonymization is a legal construct where we say, assuming the current technology and assuming how hard it would be to de-anonymize it, there's a certain level where we just say it's just so hard, it will probably never happen. So that is anonymous enough, just as a...
I disagree.
Just before, one second.
But we can take it later.
I knew that you were going to disagree. And just before we do a bit of a ping pong with me in the middle, I also want to check with the other speakers on the panel. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about the prospect of full anonymization? And maybe to pickle a bit more, is that even necessary? Do we need to get to that point? So Elena or Raj, do you want to add something here?
So I think on the clinical setting, I think you brought a very good point, anonymization, and also pointing at what Vince said, privacy, ethics, and all those things, they differ in particular use case settings. From clinical settings perspective, right, there is a 3 Ps, we call it as predict, prescribe, and persuade. It depends upon what use cases under which container. Is the use cases coming exclusively under prediction, prescription, or persuasion? Because the reason there are distinguished features here is if you're persuading somebody, they want to know more details about it. It could be a citizen, as we're talking about, or if you're prescribing something, they want to know more details. But if you're just predicting, they don't need to know more details. So anonymization, it differs, because especially in a clinical angles, if it is a chronic care management or self-care prevention wellness or triage and diagnosis or diagnostics itself or clinical decision support and care delivery, these are different settings. The privacy, ethics, and expectations from the end users varies. This is the reason legal perspective, they need to incorporate what the end user experience as well. That's what the regulatory challenges they're facing through.
Super good point. Elena, do you want to add something to the pot?
Do I want to add something? Well, for me, I guess, like, again, diverting a little bit off topic with the data anonymization is the data sharing, which I find actually super important. I think Vince touched upon it a little bit in the beginning, how essentially outside of the privacy angle, essentially it's very hard to share the data. And I think, like, if in fact to even like advance like research, we do need to figure out systems where the data is shared, whether that is anonymized or pseudo-anonymized, because I do agree that essentially there's like, it's a legal term. I agree. It's like legally you pseudo-anonymize something, but essentially the data is always there. So for me, that's the important angle that I would like to think about more, rather than focusing on the anonymization of the data set. And from my perspective, even though I understand that depending on how the data set is used, details may be more important than others. However, if you have anonymized data, you won't be able to get as much results, right? So it's better to have the consent and actually less and better quality data than a lot and anonymized.
That's a very, very good point. And I just want to make a quick reminder for everybody watching us that we will be taking questions, especially now as we walk to the final third of the panel. So I can see that a lot of people are commenting, and that makes me very, very happy to see you and engaging, especially to Maria Isabel, who's putting a lot of comments and has just mentioned that she agrees with Vince. So Vince has a bit of a fan in the in the boosters. So that's a very, very good point. And Sebastian, you can definitely add something to what has been said before, but I'm just going to do the hook to the next part of the discussion that I want to cover, which is connected to the idea of data sharing and data donation. What happens when we start thinking that those are not random and those are not heterogeneous, and the data being donated or given are from specific populations? Then we get to the problem of bias, which is another topic that we want to cover as one of the big ethics challenges. So Sebastian, shoot your shot, and then I'm going to send the bias question to the rest of the panel. Is this something that we worry about? What is at risk? Your thoughts about it. So Sebastian?
So very, very brief, because we don't want to get into the, I mean, probably we can take this offline at some point. It's super nice to discuss the inner details of your thoughts. But my main thing is, if you train a model, a generative model that is on some data, imagine you train two models, same, but without one user in one of them, right? Two data sets, and taking one out of one data set. So you generate information there, no? You generate the images. If you're able to distinguish in between these two generators, that information of that particular user is encoded in the model. So it actually has information of the model. That's I think we are paralleling thought, no? Perpendicular, sorry. If you are encoding information from one particular user, the privacy is not preserved. That's what I take for privacy. Maybe we have a different definition for privacy, but definitely anonymizing to me is not a private, because you can't always cross-link with other data sets. But as I said, we can discuss more about this offline probably. It's not the time. I
am also pretty sure, but this is not my place. Andrea was going to talk a bit about this later, but there's also a networking session after the event, so that's also probably a good point to touch back. And if we have a couple of minutes after the questions have been done, I'll be happy to throw back, because this is a bit of the most, let's say, steamy part of the discussion, where we have people from different sides. But let's talk about bias. So what are the risks? Where do we face this? Maybe in the day-to-day development, that especially looking at Vince and Raj. And is this something that we should worry about? So
yeah, absolutely. So go ahead,
Raj. No, you do it.
So absolutely, we need to worry about it. So that's the reason the regulatory perspective in the hospitals, and we probably already heard about value-based model, right? And different models that we are seeing coming from different AI companies. At the end of the day, we all agree to ensure that the algorithms of tomorrow that we're all building are not just be powerful, but also to be fair. We must build the technical, regulatory, economic-wise privacy infrastructure to deliver the large, and absolutely the diverse data. Diverse data is very important to require to refine our own algorithms to set the gear accordingly. That is very much imperative for us to move forward, because we are moving forward blindly, but we are building strongly.
It's a very good point. Vince, you want to follow up?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So to add up on this, so what is actually bias? So AI bias is a systematic deviation of what we actually expect the tool to do. And in the healthcare setting, and unfortunately prevalent problem is, if you have data available only of white people, which happens all the time because medicine has been unfair for decades. Yes, so this is not a new problem. We had this problem already for decades in drug development. It's not new. Now that it actually affects individual people, somehow we talk about it more, but it also affected individuals before, just in a group on a group level. So in the sense, this ethical discussion is not new. But if we train a model on white people, then we often have what we find is often that this behavior of what the tool is supposed to do systematically deviates that same people of color. The problem here again is the tool even sometimes does this with very high confidence, which is a problem, and completely deviates and gives worse outcomes, let's say, for people of color. And there are already publications about tools that have been shown to actually perform worse, for example, for breast cancer screening. Now, the big problem here is that it's almost impossible at the moment to get the heterogeneous data sets that are actually necessary to solve this. Due to the problems that we outlined, maybe because of data privacy, they are simply not accessible. Of course, they exist on all the servers in the world, petabytes or how many are exabytes of data, but in the end, they are not accessible. And the biggest problem they have right now is, in my opinion, it's not just a theoretical discussion, because yes, the regulatory bodies are starting to understand this problem, but right now we have a time window where it's very easy to get FDA clearance or get the CE certification in Europe with tools that are absolutely not well developed. I think many of you would be very surprised. You read in the media, I'm not going to say any names, company X got FDA certification for the AI tool to do X, and you think that's great. And then you look up and it was based on 350 patients. I mean, sorry, that's a joke. It's a joke. that's everybody who hears this would be like, I don't want to be treated by this, and I don't want to be treated by that. So they rightfully claim that. So we're in a little bit in a phase where a lot of companies now really push to get the method, the tool through, and then you read the LinkedIn messages. Oh, we're so great. There was a company during COVID, just because you mentioned COVID, they got a certification within 4 weeks in the European Union, CE certification for an AI tool within 4 weeks. I mean, this is, again, as I said, this is a joke. The tool cannot be not biased. It's just simply impossible. How can it not be biased? And when I called the people out on LinkedIn, they did not.
I remember that specific episode.
Probably. So this is not just a theoretical discussion. Right now, bad tools get certification, and these companies try to basically sell this and use the certification as some kind of marker of excellence, which right now it's absolutely not.
And so I think I will broaden the discussion even a bit further, because one of my fears when it comes to bias is that even people that are trying to solve this with a good nature, they would probably say, well, then let's just use the tool for the populations they've been trained on. And that sounds like a great idea. If this was trained mostly on white people, let's offer it to white people. And when you also say that out loud, you start realizing like, yeah, that's maybe not the greatest idea in the world. But bias does run the risk of creating a two-tier system when it comes to AI, of the people in groups which are well represented, and because I am an economist, which have an economic incentive to have products being created for them, which normally means white people, and groups who might be less represented in data, and also companies have a lower interest in actually searching for that specific data. So why look for specific West African data if you don't think that West Africa will be an interesting place to put your product? Let's just put on populations on Europe and other places. But before I talk too much, I also want to give it to the other half of the panel, Sebastià and Elena, on bias. Actually, Elena, let's do first with you, because I think the matter of products being different from other people, or AI misjudging people in a sense, feels very much the citizens' defense that you have played a role tonight.
It feels like it, doesn't it? Yeah, it feels like today I'm like representing the citizen. Yeah, I mean, I think bias is an important topic, because I think, like, again, simplifying it, I like to take it back to the basics, away from. I mean, I know we're always specifically talking about patients, and also from a doctor and physician's point of view and a researcher's point of view. But that's why I'm bringing up this citizens, let's say, perspective, because I think at the end of the day we are all biased, and I think that's something like that Vince mentioned, which is that the system, like this systemic injustice, essentially, like everybody already a system has been built in a way that is the data that we even have to to process its bias is very specific. It only has been gathered for predominantly white people and at the same time white men, cis men, let's say. So I think in a way it's a quite biased system. So how can we get out of it, especially when we are ourselves biased? So what we should do, and I think we don't have to look further. We don't have to look in West Africa, because I think we're even biased within Europe. We're biased within an organization. We're biased within a city. We're biased within a hospital. I think like diversifying that data set is like the first move to make, and being able to actually also have people looking at that data set, or being able to have people who potentially represent that segment of population in the company or in the public institution that looks at that data set. It makes, I mean, in a way, if you think about it, it makes sense that you would be continuously being biased if you are not representing that segment of population. And actually, if you're asking to solve like a POC's issue with being a white person, like you won't be able to. It's actually like, it's in a way patronizing and unfair.
So
let's hypothetically speaking. Yeah.
That's a great point you mentioned. Let me phrase one line here. I think, Ellen, you brought a very good comment. If we want diversity in our data, we have to seek diversity in the people that are collecting the data, right? And the people in charge of training that algorithm must also not be homogeneous.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a very good point. If I may, I would also just like to add something to what Elena said. I think that's a very, very interesting thought about our personal biases and AI bias, because we are kind of at a crossroads here. Because if we were to build tools, and this is, by the way, generally for any kind of AI tool, not just in healthcare, if we were to build tools on unbiased data, then actually we would suddenly use tools that also biased people would use. So actually, we would be able to reduce overall bias in the society, because the biased person will kind of use a tool and trust the output. So this is the automation bias. The moment some tool gives us an output, this is shown in psychology, then people start to trust the output of the system. Now, on the other hand, if we use all this biased data and suddenly build biased tools, then also the unbiased people will use biased tools and still trust the output. So by ingraining our biases in these automated tools, we actually potentially will get a future where even non-biased people will start making biased decisions. So that's kind of a complete dystopia, and it's the complete opposite of what we are kind of sold as what the AI hype is about. So we have to be very, very careful here, because once they are out, and you see this in areas where it's already used, justice system in the US, the tools are used, and they are used then against people of color and so forth. So it's a very, very sensitive time now, and we should be really aware of this point. We can't hear you.
You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, I've been facing some issues with this headset, and I have to disconnect and reconnect. Sebastià, anything that you would like to add to this last question? There's the comments about that I would like to bring up shortly before we finish the talk.
Exactly. I think we all agree on. So I also agree with your terms. What we need is data, no? Because if you have a white population only, you actually, how can you infer something to make the product for a broader audience? You need the information for other entities, right? And how can you get it? Just gathering it the same way you did with the other data. So it's just a matter for me of collecting data. I don't know of another way to make a model less biased. And as been said, if you have the problem is the data, because you're training one data, the model is going to reproduce that. It's going to get that information. If you feed it with other data, it will get that information. So it's just a matter of the data itself. Yeah. So definitely for me is collecting diverse data.
I completely agree. Do you know why I'm so pessimistic about it? Until this year, there are no female crash test dummies for the official tests of car crashes.
That's a great piece of data.
just let that sink in, okay? So
Jesus,
that's why I'm so pessimistic that we're actually able to really solve this.
Yeah, I know. Last week, sorry.
That. So our cars today, I say, are safe for the average white male. Just let that sink in. So I'm not very optimistic about it, but I'm trying to change it. So.
You know, I'm not on the medical field, but the other day I saw on the news that most of the tests on rats are actually male rats. So probably 20 out of 25 on one test on drugs, or even psychological tests, they're run on male rats. So this is a bias, definitely. Through data collection.
Just bringing back something that is on the comments from the people watching us, from Lena, mentioning about how much of drug development historically has not included women, both in terms of being on the development team, but very often on the people that were in the clinical trials. And if I may bring a bit of nostalgia into everything, in a very, very good event from Hacking Health here in Berlin, where I actually had the opportunity to talk to Elena for the first time, and I was invited by Aline a couple of years back, the professor started by saying how many drugs which were still in use in the 80s and 90s had been only being tested in men. And because they kind of got their validation way before, it was basically the same compound, and it kind of kept going on. And that meant that women had completely different side effects. Those drugs that were never taken into consideration. Was only when the lawsuits started piling in that they realized, like, no, but this is safe. We tested in, oh damn, we tested in no women. And that's just an old, let's say, old economy piece of what happens in AI all the time. When AI algorithms mislabel people or recommend wrong things, it's like, oh, but we had people in the populational group, didn't we? Oh no, we didn't. Well, such impressive work. We're coming to the end of the panel, and there was a question from the organizers, which I think was half for us and half for the people watching, which is, where do you face ethical issues in your day-to-day life now, in your work life? I think that's also a nice way to slowly come down from the topic, and then some final statements. So to each one in the panel here, where do you face ethical challenges in your work life today? Who wants to go first?
So I can do that.
Raj?
On a day-to-day life, right, at least from my perspective, a case of disagreement between the algorithms output and as a clinician myself and the diagnosis that I come up as, we call it as a gold standard. So there is definitely a disparity, and then sometimes we bias with what AI tools say, sometimes we go with our own gut feeling. So that's where I personally, sometimes at crossroads.
If I may then throw a bit as well, I got this the other day. Imagining that the tool would provide very, very good benefits to a group, which is very similar to the one we had, but is not a group that we have enough data yet. So the question of, do I try to create something for somebody that could use it and use it well? Or should I just focus development on people that actually have data and I can be sure and safe that I will be creating something for them? So who else is going to take this question?
I can be next. Since we also do applied machine learning, the question of bias always pops up. We do mostly, it's less problematic in the sense that we in our lab do mostly exploratory and also developments like XAI and methods research. So nothing of what we do is actually at the moment really meant to be used in the clinical setting, but we still have to always think about, okay, is there bias inside? How homogeneous was the data set? And to really make sure that in the publications we really talk about it, which is also another note that really, like, reproducible science and good science in this area should really always include, for example, a model card and reporting. Now more and more reporting standards pop up now, where you really have to write about these topics and make an assessment of what biases might my model contain. I think this is already would be a very good start, because right now there's nothing. And as I said, reporting standards now popped up, Minimar guidelines, Tripod AI guidelines, these guidelines, and I think they should really be adhered to to mitigate also that problem, so that people can understand, oh, this is a biased model, because actually we as the developers know it's biased. It doesn't mean it's not useful, because it can still show it's potentially working, but we have to be aware of the problems.
Perfect point. Elena and Sebastià, any other points to fill in?
Well, for me, it's a very different angle, I would say. Our ethical dilemmas are usually between fake news, misinformation, which is very important. So how can you fact check that everything that you share is actually accurate and true, and you don't become another troll? That's one topic, which I think it's actually important. Right now, more and more with every election that passes. And then the second topic, I think, is the ethical implications of SEO, search engine optimization, usage of data in the daily sense. How actually, what would you like to share with the general public, and what is fair and what is actually ethical to share? So
awesome. And Sebastià, final words? You started.
Not much to share here.
You started the talk.
Not much to share here, to be honest. Can go on to the next question.
Actually, the last this was the last question, but there's one final thing that I want to ask everybody involved, and that's for the people in the audience as well. If people want to know more about your work, about your opinions and all, what's the best way to contact you? So I myself can always be contacted via LinkedIn. Just send me a message if you want to talk. What about the speakers on the panel?
So I can be contacted by a text message, or a WhatsApp is much better rather than LinkedIn for me.
But then you wouldn't put would you put your telephone online? That's a privacy question.
Yeah, it's already there. It's all over the globe when it is on Google.
Very good point, Raj.
So for me, it's definitely LinkedIn. So, I mean, this is a stream that stays on YouTube, I think. So maybe we can also put it there and people can just find me, and I'm happy to be connected and answer questions. And I usually post also about my work. So it's an easy way to follow.
Yeah, for me, definitely LinkedIn. And I have a blog on privacy and machine learning on Medium. Yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm developing from basic cryptography until machine learning in the privacy field. So I'm posting every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, if I have time. But yeah, definitely the way to contact me is through LinkedIn. Okay.
Very, very good. Elena, to finish off?
LinkedIn as well, I would say, but I'm also a very big fan of WhatsApp. And this is if you want to reach me and I don't respond in any other form, that will be the one place that I will respond. That's always the case, yeah. But we also have a media platform, so we write 3 articles a week. So
that's really good.
Data
very nice.
Artificial intelligence, so I can link that up, and I would be curious to read about what you're writing, Sebastian, as well.
It's quite technical, huh? It's
but I think
it took me a while to think how to explain these things, but yeah, definitely.
But honestly,
it involves code as well. Sorry, you were saying?
No worries. I was just gonna say, because you said it's very technical, but I was gonna say, as the ethics discussion becomes more and more like normal in society, maybe it's interesting for you to start not dumping it down, but simplifying some of that work. Just coming with. It's an interesting.
It's as simple
point.
as I can. It's as simple as I can. I'm really honest. I have a GitHub account, and I'm posting there as well Jupyter notebooks for anyone who wants to follow this. So it's not only the blog; it's also the code.
Nice.
So I think is a good way to teach things. No, you read the blog, you get the insights, and then you go to the code if you know how to code a little bit, and then you test things there, just playing with it. So I'm actually preparing a course with the Open Mind community on privacy preserving machine learning. So stay tuned on LinkedIn because it's coming on February. I think we'll finish the course, so pretty soon.
Oh, that's actually such exciting news.
And Nicholas,
it's an open source. Sorry?
Wait a second, Sebastià. Raj?
And Nicholas and everybody, and we are developing digital twins for the future healthcare perspective.
Sweet.
If you have any talent, any of the new things, because that's futuristic. A lot of challenges that we are discussing today is very, very important, because it's all lesson learnings and cues from the audience as well, because what we are developing is for the future, not for today.
That's a great way to finish up. We also were slowly overstaying our welcome to the great organizers. I would like to thank everyone that was joining us in the panel today. It was an awesome discussion, very, very great. Andreas, you put a very, very nice question on YouTube, which I hope we'll be able to cover maybe the next time that we all sit down together, about weighting up the ethics, specifically about weighting up ethics and the health implication that might have. But it's going to be for another day. For now, Sebastià, Elena, Raj, Vince, Andrea, and Aline, thank you very much for inviting all of us. It was a great conversation. You will find information on how to reach out the speakers on YouTube later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Nico, thank you so much for moderating that session. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So just reminding everybody that Sebastià is looking for a job at the moment. I forgot to say that, but it's important.
Yeah.
Elena, I'm happy to host him in Texas.
Elena is organizing the best data conference in Europe. I love your conference, and if you don't know it, you should really check it out. Raj is collaborating with many companies. If you need help on data privacy and a lot of other topics, like reach out to him. Vince, super expert in the topic. You'll see him at different conferences. Yeah, reach out. And Nico, my friend, thank you so much. You did an amazing job. And Andrea, thank you for helping organizing that event, for being behind the scene and making the tech work. So everybody, thank you for being here. So some updates. So now we're gonna move to the Wonder platform. Andrea just put the link in the chat. And some updates on Health 2.0 Barcelona. We have 2 events planned for 2021, online events. The first one is going to be about femtech. With another Texan lady from a femtech focus, Dr. Brittany. And then end of January, we're organizing an event about DIGA. So
the sweet stuff.
The law in Germany that enables to prescribe and reimburse application and digital health solutions. So we thought it would be very interesting for all of us, like not in Germany, to understand how it works and maybe to get help to get it done. So stay tuned for that. We're going to share more information. And thanks, Eben, for being here. And thanks to all of you for being part of that panel. And see you now in the Wonder platform. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Happy New Year.